I've often wondered what it would be like if we taught young people swimming in the same way we teach sexuality. If we told them that swimming was an important adult activity, one that they will all have to be skilled at when they grow up, but we would never talk with them about it. We never showed them the pool. We just allowed them to stand outside closed doors and listen to all the splashing. Occasionally, they might catch a glimpse of partially clothed people going in and out of the door of the pool, and maybe they'd find a book on the hidden art of swimming. But when they asked a question about how swimming felt or what it was about, they would be greeted with blank or embarrassed looks. Suddenly, when they turned 18, we would fling open the doors to the pool and they would jump in. Miraculously, some might learn to tread water, but many would drown. We read those words by Elizabeth Canfield when we train future facilitators of Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education. We want to impress upon them the importance of the task they are about to undertake. Whether they will be working with kindergartners or 80-year-olds, they will be entrusted with providing education that is sensitive, compassionate, bonding, challenging, life-affirming, and empowering. The facilitator's job will be to keep people from drowning in sexual ignorance. Our Whole Lives, or OWL, is a lifespan curriculum co-published by the Unitarian Universalist Association, the UUA, and the United Church of Christ, the UCC. OWL has been in use since 1999 when it replaced the About Your Sexuality curriculum developed in the 1970s by the Unitarian Universalist Association. OWL is one of the most successful programs the UUA has ever offered. It is used in religious and secular settings throughout the US and Canada, with culturally appropriate adaptations used in the Philippines and being pilot tested in Tanzania. I'll speak more about OWL in a moment, but first I'll share why we discussed sexuality in our congregations in general. The UUA has been committed to sexual rights and health for more than 40 years. Congregations and national leaders rose to the personal and political challenges of the AIDS crisis. We led interfaith coalitions in the movement for marriage equality. We continue to hold a place at the forefront of the ongoing struggle for gender and reproductive justice. Our bylaws and practices recognize many identities and types of relationships, as well as the need to prevent sexual abuse and misconduct, including misconduct by our clergy. UUism sees sexual expression as an affirming part of the human experience, and we support everyone's right to learn about and engage in sex in consensual, pleasurable, developmentally appropriate ways. We also acknowledge that sexuality in our society is damaged by violence, exploitation, alienation, dishonesty, abuse of power, and the treatment of persons as objects. Faith tradition doesn't maintain a list of shalt nots. Rather, we offer opportunities to learn about sexuality, to engage in dialogue, and to gain spiritual perspectives on sex so that we can make decisions wisely, ethically, and in accordance with our personal and faith values. Our embrace of sexuality as a core element in the human experience has proved to be life-saving, literally, for people who have emerged from religious traditions that shamed or diminished them. They have found that Unitarian Universalism encourages them to discover and reconnect with the rich and vibrant beauty of their sexuality. Evidence is central to UU perspectives on sexuality. We trust the statistics showing that education decreases rates of unintended pregnancy and improves health outcomes. We know that honoring each person's sexual identity can decrease self-harm. We know that sexual expression is a developmental process that begins in infancy and lasts throughout life. We know that consent education decreases sexual assault. We offer welcoming congregation and welcoming renewal programs to support LGBTQIA members and visitors, a small group ministry program called Parents and Caregivers as Sexuality Educators, webinars and resources on topics ranging from consent to support for gender-diverse children. We have also begun developing an anti-racist, anti-oppressive sexuality training course for UU seminarians, ministers, and religious educators. During the pandemic lockdown, my UCC colleague, Reverend Amy Johnson, and I created online adaptations for the grades 4, 6, 7 to 9, and older adult editions. We initiated monthly educational webinars for adults. We curated sex ed resources for parents and children and created the Under Your Wing video series for parents of young children. And we developed facilitator training on the UUA's online learning platform. All of those resources are available to congregations meeting in person as well. More than 60% of our congregations have offered at least one age level of Our Whole Lives sexuality education over the years. I'm trying to increase that number because OWL has set the standard for comprehensive sexuality education for 23 years. OWL is a gift congregations can give our children, our youth, and adults, as well as our larger communities. OWL's effectiveness is due in part to the values embodied within the curriculum. Values are ideals or beliefs, attitudes that guide behavior. They explain what we understand to be good or bad, desirable or undesirable. For example, in terms of gender and orientation, we are who we are. We don't choose our sexuality, our sexual identity. However, our values determine whether we accept and appreciate our own and others' gender and orientation. Our values are guided by the families and culture we grew up in, our faith traditions, and our life experiences. They affect the types of people we find physically attractive, which smells and sounds we find arousing, the kind of clothing or body modification we deem alluring or off-putting, our decisions around sexual health and parenting, and whether or how we will engage in relationships. Our values shape our views about sexuality as a positive or negative part of our humanity. OWL helps people of all ages explore sexuality within a framework of the values of self-worth, responsibility, sexual health, justice, and inclusivity. These values honor sexuality as a good part of the human experience, even as we recognize that aspects of it can be misused and violated. When people call me to inquire whether the program is a good fit for their organization or for their child, I say, well, if you agree with the OWL values, then this curriculum might be a good fit. But if any of those values don't work for you, another curriculum might be a better option. For example, a minister once asked whether he could offer OWL without all that gay-affirming material. I said no, because the OWL value of justice and inclusivity honors every aspect of sexuality, including a range of sexual identities. These values are reflected in every activity, reading, and recommended resource within the curriculum. They are the music that sings throughout all levels of the program. Self-worth is usually defined as a sense that people have of their own value. In OWL, we also define it as the belief that people of all ages and stages are entitled to dignity and self-worth and to their own attitudes and beliefs about sexuality. Each level of the curriculum includes readings, and many workshops include suggestions for songs that reflect the workshop topic and OWL values. The OWL value of responsibility calls us to enrich our lives by expressing sexuality in ways that enhance human wholeness and fulfillment, and that express delight, pleasure, responsible sexual choices, love, and commitment. The value of sexual health says that knowledge in human sexuality is helpful, not harmful. We all have the right to accurate information about sexuality and to have our questions answered. We teach that healthy sexual relationships are consensual, non-exploitative, mutually pleasurable, safe, developmentally appropriate, respectful, and based on mutual expectations and caring. This value also acknowledges the many ways there are to express sexual feelings alone or with a partner, and that is healthier for young teens to postpone sexual intercourse. The justice and inclusivity value acknowledges that people of all ages, races, ethnicities, genders, backgrounds, income levels, physical and mental abilities, and sexual orientations must have equal value and rights when it comes to sexuality. Essential to our ability to truly embody the value of justice and inclusivity is the UUA's and UCC's commitment to hire accountability readers during the OWL curriculum development and revision process. These paid readers provide feedback based on their personal perspectives of race, disability, gender identity, and sexual orientation. We do this because it's essential that we get OWL right. It may be the only place participants trust others enough to disclose their sexual identity or to ask questions that will keep them safe. OWL programs transform a cultural climate of confusion and fear about sexuality into a new reality in which every person's inherent worth and dignity is valued. This is especially true when congregations incorporate material from a companion guide called Sexuality in Our Faith, which adds religious rituals such as chalice lightings and hymns, or biblical references for UCC programs, and adds faith-relevant discussions to secular sexuality education. This faith companion is important because liberal religious sexuality education gives children, youth, and adults a safe forum in which to make meaning of their lives. Participants learn to feel good about themselves and their sexuality, while they clarify their own values and their faith values, apply those values to their decisions and experiences, and learn about their bodies, feelings, identity, behavior, and relationships. OWL employs experiential learning theory, which is a process of completing an activity before sharing observations about it, reflecting on what is learned, and considering how that new knowledge can be put to use. The model fits well with our Unitarian Universalist affirmation of each person's search for truth and meaning. In the elementary grades, OWL brings these experiences home with drawing and reading activities that supplement what children have learned in OWL workshops. This supports parents as their children's primary sexuality educators. In OWL for grades 7 to 9, one activity uses grab bags of differently colored candies to teach the impact of contraceptive barriers on the statistical likelihood of unintended pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections with or without protection. It's surprising how one's heart can beat a little faster simply waiting to open your hand to reveal a candy representing whether a pregnancy or STD was prevented. In OWL for older adults, participants can share personal stories of loss before completing activities that honor grief and help participants identify ways in which they might experience expanded joy in their lives. Participants may not recall the specifics of any of these activities later, but they will recall the experience of being fully accepted, conversing comfortably about sensitive topics, and learning how to make values-based decisions that respect their own and others' sexuality and worth. No other curriculum does sex ed like Our Whole Lives and Sexuality in Our Faith do. I've been a fan of the program since 1999 when my congregation's director of religious education recruited me to facilitate a brand new program called Our Whole Lives. I enjoyed it so much I was inspired to enter grad school and become a professional sex educator. Now that's not what most facilitators do, but overall, they describe the experience as fulfilling, meaningful, and often life-changing. The elementary and secondary levels of the curriculum are the most often used, but the young adult, and older curriculums are also excellent. Some of you may wonder what could be left for adults to learn, but I assure you that we are never too old or too experienced to keep learning about sexuality. For example, when I was traveling by train a few years ago, I entered into conversation with a Jewish man sitting across from me in the dining car. We shared our professions. His, a cantor, me, a sex educator. He disclosed the tension he felt married to the mother of his children while being sexually attracted to men. He said he had read a book that claimed that his same-sex attraction was due to his having been damaged by bad parenting. We discussed sexual orientation and the implications of religious values and psychological theory for the next 30 minutes. I didn't challenge his religious beliefs, but I did point out the flaws in the theory that he referenced. If he had been in an adult OWL program, he would have been invited to examine the values he was taught, and he would have learned that his sexual orientation didn't make him damaged goods, but was rather an intrinsic and good part of his humanity. Another illustration of the value of sex ed for adults comes from a woman in her 70s who mistakenly walked into an OWL for older adults workshop at her congregation. When she realized her mistake, she told the director of religious education, "I don't need this class. I'm a widow and I'm not even dating anyone." Friends encouraged her to stay, and she remained throughout the 14-week program. At its end, the woman proudly told the group, "I just tossed out my old pajamas and bought a pair that feels wonderful against my skin. I now know that I deserve that kind of pleasure, and I don't need somebody else around to appreciate it." That feedback made my heart sing. I didn't write the curriculum to help older adults have better sex, although that might be one result. I wrote it to help them feel more confident, more hopeful, and more empowered in their right to sensual pleasure and sexual expression in whatever form that might take. From buying new pajamas, to coming out of the closet, to protecting sexual health and experiencing more joy. Blessed be. We are part of a faith tradition that values us as sexual beings throughout our whole lives. We might express our sexuality in different ways, and we may not always understand each other's identities or behaviors. But if we consider sexuality within the context of our UU principles and the Our Whole Lives value of self-worth, responsibility, sexual health, justice, and inclusivity, we will treat our own and others' sexuality with respect, acceptance, and joy. May it be.